Today I'm with my friend Alavia Khawaja, and she is a yoga instructor. She owns the studio that we're in right now. It's called Golden Moon Studio, and she also is a community builder in the Filipino community here in Dallas-Fort Worth. She is Filipina and Pakistani, and we are celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Yes.
So I wanted to know a little bit about your background because you're not from Dallas or you haven't lived here all your life.
So my parents lived out the American dream. They basically met in New York. They met through a friend of a friend and they got married really fast. So I spent my childhood basically in New York. I moved out of the city when I was 2. We moved into Long Island, but we went back every weekend to see my mom's family because my grandma, my Lola, was still there.
So your mom is Filipino?
Yes, my mom is the Filipino, my dad is Pakistani. And so we were living in Long Island until I was 10. My dad was in IT and he used to like hop companies. So he was like, you know what? I'm bored of New York. Let's go to Ohio. No plan, no nothing. And then we moved to Dallas when I was 17 and it's helped me flourish a lot more since then. So I grew up in Hilliard, which is about 15 minutes out of Columbus. Hilliard was very much farmland. But yeah, so it was not my favorite place to be.
And so I guess growing up in Hilliard, were you one of the only Asians? Or tell me more about the community that, you hung out with in high school.
So as you can imagine, growing up, it's mostly white people. When I was a freshman, I was hanging out with my white friends, my alternative friends. We're emo. And one of the girls had an Asian, her female friend was Asian. So that girl came to the lunch table to talk to that girl. But then she looked at me, pointed, and was like, "You're Asian, right?" And I was like, yeah, I felt kind of seen, to be honest. So ever since then, I started hanging out with that girl. And then we ended up like accidentally making our own little Asian clique. So we started hanging out, and that's when I started reconnecting with being ethnic, accepting being not white.
So this Asian girl group that you guys made, what were some of the things that you guys relished in because of that shared identity? Like, what were the things that
we shared?
Yeah.
First thing off the top of my head is K-pop. All of us got introduced to K-pop in a different form. For me, I got introduced from my Indonesian friends. That was our only really representation.
And it's East Asians, right?
Right. So I know where you're going with that. Yeah, so we all tried to be a little bit more Eastern. One's Chinese. 2 of them were Khmer. And then there's me, who's like Pakistani and Filipino. I'm like the most removed from like, K-pop ever. But
and
like,
just for some context, Khmer is the people from Cambodia.
Yes. So me and my best friend back then, we were really trying to fit in the mold a little bit. We were like wearing circle lenses. If y'all don't remember, you'll have to look up old Jongs.
Made your eyes bigger.
Yeah.
They were colored.
I had the Asian mullet back then. I think the beauty standard was to have like small lips. So I remember, which is funny now because I want big lips now, but like back then I would always smile like to make my lips a little smaller. Yeah. Like that's crazy how like
the beauty standards have changed.
Yeah. A lot of people think that the reason I overline my lips is because of like black culture. And I want to give my flowers to the black girls out there. But actually the real reason I started overlining my lips was because of Aishwarya Rai when I started getting into my Desi side. So I think she was Miss World or Miss Universe 1994. Yeah, but she was an actress in this movie that I really, really liked, and her lips were huge. And I was like, I want to look just like her. But that's only when I started getting into my brown side.
Let's talk about that. So she was a staple for, I guess, the brown standard of beauty. That earlier stage of high school, you were in your
chasing the Asian phase. Yeah. Pretending I wasn't Pakistani kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so when did you make this transition into like finding your Pakistani identity and that side of you?
So that was actually all the way in college. Like I was probably like either 20 or 21. I might even been 22 to be honest. So very late game. I joined the Filipino Student Association in college and I had met this girl there. She was full Pakistani, but she was hanging around with the Filipino crowd. She ended up like attaching herself to me because I was half Pakistani as well. And I thought she was really cool. So I was like, you know what? Let's see what being Pakistani is about. To connect, I was listening to Bollywood songs. And she was like, oh my God, you're such a fob. Like, here, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. And she was sending me modern music, a little bit more westernized, but like still the language is like Urdu or Hindi or whatever it was, Punjabi or something. That's how I got my intro into it. I found it to be a lot easier to be brown, actually, to be Pakistani or to be South Asian, because me being Muslim, I feel like there was a heavy disconnect between me and the majority of the Filipinos, because I didn't know any Muslim Filipinos back then. So it was really hard for me to like kind of fit in when my lifestyle was so much more strict than theirs. That's when I was like, you know what, maybe it is easier to be like Desi. So I started hanging out with like South Asians from that. Now like my foot is in both communities, like a lot better established. I'm very like active in the Desi community and the Filipino community. So now I think I'm in a lot better of a place, whereas back then I always felt like I had to be one or the other.
Within the Filipino community, did you ever feel a little bit different because you were Pakistani, or within the Desi community, did you ever feel a little different because you were Filipina?
So in the Filipino community, I think it was all in my head. For me, my biggest insecurities was I didn't really look Filipino. I get Nepali a lot, actually. I have gotten Khmer sometimes, but never Filipino. And I think the only reason I got Khmer was because back where I was in Hilliard, there was a lot of Cambodians. Like almost the default Asian was Cambodian at the time.
And you were hanging around.
Yeah, exactly. But usually I get like either Nepali or Hispanic here in Texas. I didn't speak the language, but to be honest, a lot of Filipinos don't. Me being Muslim, I couldn't really eat what they ate.
Because there's a lot of pork,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
some of the famous Filipino dishes are pork.
Lechon, yeah. Lechon, pork adobo, stuff like that. But also, I was dressing more conservative than they were. So, like, for instance, when I was doing the traditional dance for the Filipino Student Association, they wanted the uniform to be knee-length white skirts. And I wasn't showing any leg at the time. So trying to find a way to, like, make their uniform fit for me was really hard.
That's when it came out that, like, you do feel different, right?
Yes, that was the pivotal point. And so me, who was conservative at the time, well, more conservatively dressed at the time, I was like, okay, how am I going to get this to work for me? I could wear black leggings underneath, but back then I thought it looked stupid. Granted, today I would have just done that. I went through many malls looking for opaque, either white or tan leggings, could not find them. I ended up finding opaque tights. So that's what I used. But because they were footed, I slipped on stage and I was very upset about it. I was blaming them for like pushing for this uniform. Like, but then again, like, can I blame them? It's one person versus like everybody else, right? Why would they have to accommodate for me? So that's when I realized like I'm very different from these people. I don't know if this like fits in my lifestyle. I don't know if I could be a part of this.
Is that what pushed you more towards the
Desi side? Yeah, because like they're usually familiar with like Muslims, for instance. Like maybe they're not Muslim, maybe they're Hindu or something else, but they already understand like, oh, my Muslim friend's gonna be here, no pork. You know, like they already know that. So I didn't have to explain anything to them, really. But for the Desi side, I think that the hard part of that was the fact that I don't speak the language, because almost every Desi speaks. They'll crack jokes. For me, I understand bits and pieces, but not enough for like the jokes to make sense to me. Or like maybe my mind is going too slow because I'm picking the words apart and like moving them where they're supposed to be. So things like that go over my head. But in general, it was easier because I felt like I looked it. Because a lot of, you know, Pakistan shares a border with China. There's Nepal. There's, you know, Bangladeshis that look a little bit Eastern. So like with the Desi community, I'm always mistaken for either Nepali or Bangladeshi. So it's not that I look too different. I could still pass. The language was the hardest part.
You're a part of PACE, and I'll let you talk more about that.
So PACE stands for Filipino American Community Endeavors. I'm the marketing chair for this nonprofit, and we basically put together events in Dallas, Fort Worth in terms of like Filipino stuff. But we put on the biggest Filipino festival in Texas as of right now. As of last year, it's become the biggest one in Texas. We'll start Palenque, and we have our community partners that put together events. I was just at UbeFest yesterday. Yeah, so the Filipino community is growing. I knew like almost everybody at UbeFest because of us pushing the community together. The community's gotten a lot stronger through PACE launching. The idea for PACE was conceptualized July or June of 2022, but I wasn't a part of it back then. I joined in August before our first launch, and ever since then, we've just been strengthening the community. We've been really advocating for Filipino culture. We're trying not to be cliquish. We're trying to get as many of people of the community as involved as we can. So I think that's why it's growing so fast and growing so well also.
And also trying to make a community center, right? So that's like the big initiative right now is creating that like space.
Yes, exactly. So in Richardson, we have the Chinatown, even though it's like a little plaza, but that's where they host their events. Vietnamese too, they have like Asian Times Square. Filipinos, for Independence Day, we had to rent out the Carrollton Senior Center.
And Carrollton is known for like the Koreans.
Exactly, yeah. So we were just like, why do we not have a space? We have like about 80,000 Filipinos in the DFW Metroplex, maybe more. That's our goal. We want to build a community center and a place for like the Filipino business and Filipino community to gather. We want to create a space where we have the resources that we would have wanted when we were younger, so that we could enroll like, let's say, our kids into like the Tagalog classes, you know, Ilocano. Or
I want to hear you talk a little bit more about, I guess, how you're working on developing the brown community in DFW.
If y'all have ever been to California, there's always a really popping young brown community. There'll be like South Asian DJs with South Asian tattoo artists, South Asian tea or whatever vendors. They just come together, clothing designers. They like really show out in terms of graphics and arts and culture and stuff like that. It's modernized. Exactly. Whereas here in Dallas, a lot of the events are put on by like aunties, and it's just really old school. It feels almost like awkward when you go in there. It's not like young and hip, and it's not like appealing to the people that are our age. So I'm hoping to put together something like what they have in New York and California. I'm working with a friend of mine, like Eve, on it. So I'd make like Pakistani streetwear as well as Filipino streetwear. I actually have a fashion line that I'm working on. My mom is my seamstress. I have one piece made, so that's the one that I'm wearing. But I've never met anybody else that does that around Dallas.
So tell me more about your brand, because it is a mixture of your two cultures.
My brand is Datukutti. I make Filipino and Pakistani streetwear. Basically, I do have some pieces that combine it. Like what's really funny is one of my best-selling shirts is actually a Jolly Bay shirt. I basically like waifu-fied the Jolly Bee mascot. And play on words, it says Jolly Bay in English up top. Jolly Bee, Jolly Bay.
So Jolly Bee is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like a Filipino fast food chain.
Yes. Yeah. It competes with McDonald's in the Philippines. But I also have Urdu text on it. It says like Johnny Bee on it. So like instead of Jolly Bay, where Bay is the girlfriend part, Johnny in like Urdu Hindi, right? Johnny is like, that's the Bay part. And like the Bee is obviously the jolly part, right? So Johnny's like your life, your love, it's a pet name. That's Johnny Bee. And I knew Filipinos wouldn't know what that says. And it's like the Desi people that like when they're passing it, they might not even know like Jolly Bee, but they'll just be like, oh, is that Urdu? Like, what is that?
So that's the fusion of the two sides. Because you do have some shirts that are like made in the Philippines, you're proud to be Filipino.
Yeah.
And then you have some for like the brown community,
stuff,
like made in Pakistan. So I guess like the fusion of your two worlds comes together in shirts like that, using your wit, your smarts, your humor, combine it so that if you know, you know. And
if you know, you know. Exactly. My whole brand's like, if you know, you know. Like,
so like what made you decide to start this brand?
Actually, how I started the brand was because I made a Pakistan sweater for my dad. I saw 2 sweaters on sale at Macy's, white and green. I bought them both. I pulled them apart.
Like literally cut them in half?
Yeah, from the seams, I like took the threading out.
Okay.
And I sewed the white sleeve onto the green shirt. And my friend owns a printing business, so, you know, shout out Create World. I had him print like the moon and the star on it. And I gave it to my dad as a gift, and he raved about it. He was like so impressed.
Yeah, dad's seal of approval.
Yeah. I ended up wearing it to campus, and like a bunch of people were asking me, where'd you get that? Obviously, I made it, so that's what I would say. And they were just like, oh, can you make it? You should sell it. So I made a t-shirt version. I made an Instagram. I like put it on there, but I didn't have my face or anything because I was very insecure. So I didn't want anyone to know it was my business. I didn't want to be like, hey, I'm selling this, you know, that kind of thing. So then when I would walk around campus and people would be like, oh, where'd you get that? Instead, I would be like, oh, it's from this Instagram shop, and they'd look at it as like 2 posts, no face, no followers. They just leave it. And I'd be like, well, I tried, you know, like whatever. It was only so I went viral on TikTok for my sweater actually, and also my Filipino shirt. I think I wore both of them in the same one. Only after I was like, oh, it's my brand, I make it and I sell it.
Then people
that's when I started.
Yeah,
exactly. That's when I started like selling stuff. You know, at Ube Fest yesterday, there was at least like 5 people wearing like my merch from like previous times they bought it.
Exactly. So it's nice to see, I'm sure, as you know, like now knowing your story of how you started and how you were more shy with it to now like seeing people like rep it and be proud of it. And we have a friend who like constantly wears one of his shirts. It's like Lumpia Lifters.
Yeah. And that was really flattering. That stroked my ego to the moon. Now that I saw that, I was like, you know what? I think that my brand can be like really iconic, at least in the Filipino community in Dallas. So,
and even in the brown community, once, you know, the young, urban, whatever demographic you're trying to, you know, target gets
wind of it. But there's no like brown festivals like that, like the Filipino ones. There's nothing like that yet. I feel like brown people don't show out, and that's what I want to change here in Dallas. They really don't show out the way, because again, they're very used to like auntie uncle events. So I think
or religious events, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, they show out for that, but that's a very different vibe.
What are some changes that you'd like to see within the Asian community? And we can get specific to specifically Filipino, specifically Pakistani.
I think with the Filipino community, when they want to connect with their culture, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I like ube and Jollibee. That's it. You know, like it's very surface level. And this is going to take a lot of work, but like looking into like your indigenous tribes, textiles that your ancestors used to wear, and basically dig before the Spanish colonial period, that would be a real representation of like your roots. What we have right now, like even like the Maria Clara dress, which is considered the national costume of the Philippines, that's from the Spaniards. Do you even know what you used to wear before then? I feel like, because that's
like
something
pre-colonialization history and understanding.
That's what I'll give it. I'll give the flowers to the South Asians, because they were like, they've been on that for a while. Before the pandemic, there was like this whole urban desi movement. There was Indo-Western movement. They were pushing for people to wear the cultural wear in everyday wear. So pre-colonial period, saris are worn without the blouse. So like recently people have been pushing to start wearing like blouseless saris. Like I know that it's going to be scandalous here, but
like chest exposed.
Well,
blouseless. What do you?
Well, no. So the sari wraps over your chest.
Right.
Now, what you can do is you can tuck it. You can even wrap around first to make like a bandeau out of it.
Because I've seen the crop top, like it's like a t-shirt
the blouse.
Yeah,
but that wasn't part of it before. There, people are like pushing to decolonize that part. So I'll have to give the flowers to the South Asians for that. I think Filipinos are still very far from going even like talking about like traditional wear and that kind of aspect, but I think they'll get there eventually. Brown people, what I would recommend is show up. Like if you go to Alamir, they have Bollywood nights on Fridays. It'll mostly be international students. They'll be like, oh, they have this here, and
it feels like to them like a piece of home versus like American-born brown people. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like they're doing Americanized things.
Yes.
So I think there is, within the Asian community, like fresh off the plane, or back then it was fresh off the boat. And then there's, the banana, which is like your yellow on the outside, or I guess brown on the outside and white on the inside.
Coconuts is what they called it.
Coconuts being the
brown outside, white inside.
Right. Being the brown example of that. And then there's of course like a spectrum in between. Something that you're also alluding to is like not necessarily being one or the other, right? Because it seems like for the events that are happening, it's the people who are fresh off the plane or more recent immigrants who are looking for that little bit of home or what feels like home. And then for the ones
I think that's what it is. That you're 100% right. The reason that like brown people don't show out here is because the events are not marketed to them. It's marketed for people who want a taste of back home rather than incorporating it into
American culture.
Yes, exactly.
Like the Asian American experience, right? Because like we have our own unique experiences as third culture kids.
So I was always like, why are brown people not showing out?
And I mean, I think over time, forming your identity is a process, right? So like at one point you said that you went to your Filipino side, and then the other point of your life you went into more of your like Pakistani side, and then now you feel more balanced and in between. And so everyone has to go through that stage. And so there could be South Asian Americans who want to go to those events and who do go to those events because they're proud to be that, not necessarily because they want that taste of home, but that is also dependent on where they are in their journey. But thank you so much, Alavia, for sitting with me today for this interview and for answering all my questions.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.